So we got some pretty big news regarding Nintendo. It looks like Nintendo, for the very first time, is actually going to allow their customers to actually cancel pre-orders, and this is a step in the right direction just because for the longest time Nintendo was really anti-consumer when it comes to getting your money back. And if you look at other storefronts, especially on PC with things like Steam, they've had amazing policies. Like, for instance, if you buy a game on Steam, they would allow you to actually refund a game in like the first 2 weeks. As long as you played it less than 2 hours, they would give your money back, no questions asked. This isn't technically the same thing, but it is nice that Nintendo at least is finally opening up. And I hope Nintendo takes this a little bit further. I hope Nintendo actually goes another step by actually allowing their customers to actually get refunds for games they've already purchased, kind of like Steam. Now, there is one thing that's kind of interesting about this policy that Nintendo just implemented to the eShop. You will be able to cancel a game that you have pre-ordered, but there is one big caveat. The big caveat is if you haven't canceled the game prior to 7 days before the game has actually coming out, then you pretty much can't get a refund. So technically, even though you can cancel a pre-order, you're not really canceling a pre-order, if that makes sense, just due to the fact that when you do click that pre-order button, now it won't actually charge your credit card. It'll only charge your credit card or your debit card if it's been 7 days before the game's about to release. So technically, you're still really not getting your money back on this. But even so, it is still a nice policy regardless, because maybe you've been sitting on this for a while and then you change your mind or whatever the case may be. You can kind of just cancel it. So whatever it means, it's still good because it does kind of shed some light on the whole Nintendo policies for refunds for games, and maybe in the future they'll finally open up and allow people to get refunds for games they maybe have bought for whatever the case may be, and maybe want a refund on those games. So this is a pretty nice deal regardless, and it does show that Nintendo is moving towards more consumer-friendly policies regarding refunds and regarding things like that. And I am glad that Nintendo finally realizes, yeah, we're consumers, and sometimes consumers make mistakes, so it's always nice if you can correct your mistakes. And it always is nice that companies are showing that they want to be consumer friendly, and it does help their brand as a whole, because then when people see something like this, they're like, yeah, Nintendo is really trying to be for the consumer and not really trying to be for the company, and always just being greedy and always caring about money in the long run. And honestly, that's something that I'm really appreciative of, and I really do like it when companies start doing policies that are for the consumer instead of anti-consumer. And that's pretty much what we're going to see here with Nintendo, and hopefully in the future this does trickle down to not just pre-orders again, but to things like getting a full refund for a game that you may have purchased. Now, the next one is going to be about the Apple iPad Air 4, because it looks like the iPad Air 4 is going to be getting a brand new refresh, and this refresh is actually a pretty big deal. It's not just an incremental upgrade where they upgrade the chipset in it and things like that, because for the longest time when people talked about the upcoming iPad Air 4, they were like, yeah, it may get a brand new chipset, of course, to make the performance faster, and they're going to make the screen slightly bigger. They're going to go from 10.4 inches, or 10.5 inches, excuse me, all the way up to 10.8. Sure, that's not a lot more screen real estate, but anything is better, especially when you use tablets, maybe for multimedia consumption, or you want to do some work on your tablet. Then having a bigger screen in general, of course, is always nice. But it turns out that's not going to be the case. They're not just going to give it a bigger screen, and they're not going to just give it a faster chip inside of it. Of course, keep in mind, again, these are only rumors and speculations at the very moment, but time and time again, we're so close to these devices launching. Most of the time, this stuff has already leaked out from the factory and from employees and inside sources. So of course, most of this you don't even need to take with a grain of salt. To be honest, you can actually believe these rumors. But basically what these rumors are referring to, the iPad Air 4, the iPad Air 4 is pretty much going to be the 2018 version of the iPad Pro. So it's going to take the old iPad Pro's aesthetics from 2018 and pretty much put them in the iPad Air 4. Unfortunately, you're not going to be getting everything that the iPad Pros have to offer, but that makes sense because this is going to be a cheaper alternative to the iPad Pros. Alongside that, it looks like the unfortunate thing is they actually are going to be making this a little bit more expensive than the current Air if they go ahead and do the same design as the 2018 iPad Pro. I'm actually all for this because even though the price may go up from, let's say, $500 to like 600 and something dollars, at least you would be getting a modern design. And I think it is about time that not just the Pros get this modern design, but the cheaper alternative to the iPad Pros actually get the redesign and updated design. Because if you take a look at what Samsung has been doing lately, especially with their older tablet, the Samsung Galaxy Tab S6, they had two variants of the Tab S6. So they had the regular Tab S6 and then they had the S6 Lite, and the S6 Lite was a watered down version, of course, of the regular S6. But the nice thing with the S6 tablet was the fact that, or the S6 Lite tablet, excuse me, the lighter version of that tablet actually had the same design as the actual S6. You were just losing features, and that is pretty nice that you would be getting the same design here with the iPad Air 4. Now, if rumors do hold up and this thing does get pushed to 10.8 inches instead of 10.5 inches, that kind of makes me wonder what are they going to do with the iPad Pro, because right now Apple does have two variants of the iPad Pro. They have the 11 inch and then they have the 12.9 inch, roughly 13 inches, and it makes me wonder, are they going to keep the iPad Pro 11 inch with the iPad Air 4? I honestly don't know, but for me, I think Apple wouldn't keep the iPad Pro 11 inch and have a 10.8 inch option, because what's the point of that when they're so similar in screen real estate? If they wanted to really make them stand out, they would still keep the 10.5 inch iPad Air 4 and then have the two models of the iPad Pro. But if the iPad Air 4 is going to have a 10.8 inch screen, I think they should just ditch the iPad Pro 11 inch. I know the 11 inch is going to have more features, to be honest, because it's still dubbed the Pro version of the iPad, where even though this one gets the modern design of the iPad Pros, it's not going to have things like the higher refresh rate. Apparently, it's not going to have the 4-speaker setup. But the nice thing is, from what I'm hearing, is it is going to support USB Type-C. It is also going to support that brand new connector, so you can actually connect it to Apple's Magic Keyboard, which is actually a game changer, and I have actually used that, and I'm in love with that. And if you want to get some real work done, I really do think the Magic Keyboard is an amazing product. Sure, it's expensive, but you pay what you pay for. You get what you pay for with that product, and I really do think that's an amazing product. And then one thing that's actually very weird about the iPad Air 4, which no other iPad currently has, it's gonna have Touch ID instead of Face ID. But the really weird thing is, it's not going to be your traditional traditional Touch ID, just due to the fact that they do have pretty much a no bezel display, just like the previous iPad Pro. And if they're going to be taking iPad Pro's signature body design, then where would they place the Touch ID on the iPad Air 4? Well, it looks like, from what everyone's saying, is Touch ID for the very first time is actually going to be on the power button. Now, this is something we've already seen in the tech industry. When we look at Android's handsets, there have been a number of Android handsets that actually implement something like a fingerprint sensor on the actual power button, and I'm actually all for this, and I think it would work extremely well. I would actually say it might even work better than an under the display fingerprint sensor, because I've tried phones that do have a fingerprint sensor under the display, and honestly, I'm not really a big fan of that. I am a person that personally prefers you put a physical fingerprint sensor somewhere on your device, just because I think it's much more faster and much more reliable, because you know where to place your finger. A lot of times with these under the display fingerprint sensors, it doesn't cover the whole display, and what ends up happening is you have to put your finger in a certain area on the display, and usually it's hard to detect your finger, and a lot of times it messes up, and it's just not really reliable. So I am glad they are putting it on the power button. That makes me really wonder if the iPhone 12 or any other iPads in the near future are actually going to get something like this, because I'm a person that still believes that there should be two different types of authentication. There should be that Touch ID, and there should be that Face ID as well. I think those two can live in harmony, and I really do think it would be awesome to have that, just in case maybe you want to use your fingerprint instead of your face. And it's not like they can't implement that. They can still implement both. Do they really need to? Honestly, they really don't need to, but just the fact that it would actually be there, I think would actually be a pretty big game changer, and make these devices much more have much more security, and just give you another option for security. So overall, it looks like the iPad Air 4 is going to be one heck of a tablet, and I think when this thing comes out, I think it'll almost be a better sell than the iPad Pro. Sure, from these rumors and speculations, again, you won't get the quad stereo setup with the speakers, you won't get things like the higher refresh rate on the display apparently, but just the fact that you would be able to get pretty much an iPad Pro design in a much more cheaper iPad, I think a lot of people would actually go for that, because what are you paying when you get the iPad Pros? You are going to be getting, I think, slightly better performance. You would be getting the quad stereo setup. Of course, you would be able to get a higher refresh rate on the screen, but of course they are pretty expensive for what they are. So to get that same design and a cheaper iPad is pretty awesome here, and I think these rumors and speculation do make sense, and I personally think it is about time to make another iPad have the same design as the iPad Pros, but just at a cheaper price and a cheaper alternative. So that's actually going to be pretty awesome if the iPad Pro 4 does hold up to be true. This looks like a very killer device. Now, the next one for today's episode is going to be about the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 2, because it looks like the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 2 finally has a release date, and it looks like it's coming out September 18th. Of course, these brand new phones that are always futuristic, whether they're folding phones or dual screen phones like the Microsoft Duo smartphone, these things are going to be very expensive, and the Fold 2 is going to cost you $2,000 US, and that's very expensive. It's kind of a shame this thing is coming out at $2,000, because that means a lot of people won't get to test what the next taste in technology is going to be about, just because this thing is a very expensive device. Now, we finally already know what this thing is going to look like. It looks like the biggest upgrade from the Galaxy Z Fold 1 to the Z Fold 2 is going to be the outside screen. It looks like the outside screen is going to get a major overhaul, and they're actually going to put a more traditional smartphone screen on it, because prior to the second one coming out, the first one had an outside screen, but it was just very small, and it was like, yeah, that's cool, but if I wanted to use it as a regular smartphone, it's kind of hard to use it as a regular smartphone when the outside screen is so small. I end up using it for like maybe a quick text message or maybe a quick Google search, but that's about it. I don't use it as my primary screen on my Z Fold, just due to the fact that it's a little bit too small. So I am glad they went back to the drawing board and realized, hey, maybe some people don't want to always open up their device, and in some scenarios you just want to pull it out really quickly and use it as a traditional smartphone. So I am glad the screen is becoming much more bigger on this. Keep in mind, the screen on the outside of this Z Fold 2 is not going to be as big as a traditional smartphone, but that makes sense. The form factor of this thing is just very different than what you're used to on a traditional smartphone. The one thing I am very curious about the Z Fold 2 is going to be the durability. The biggest problem with these foldable phones and things like this for a while now has been the durability. They really need to get the durability down, especially when these things are asking the world from you. They're asking very high premium prices, even premium than a traditional smartphone, which you guys know, if you do end up buying one of those crazy high-end premium smartphones like the brand new Note 20 Ultra, you know you are getting quality and you know you're going to get a smartphone that lasts. But with these things, you don't really know if you're going to get a product that is going to last. You have a hinge, and then on top of the hinge maybe breaking, you do have to worry about the screen because these screens aren't as durable as something like a traditional smartphone. So you always have things to worry about. So you can see that these things are just very hard sells at anything over $1,000, especially for the durability and the price they're asking. It's kind of like, why charge this much? I understand it is a new type of product, and anytime you usually have a new type of product coming out, of course, these things always start very expensive, and then hopefully over time these things get pretty cheap. I would have personally liked to see this thing more closer to $1,000. If they can get it around $1,000, I think it would be much more justifiable, especially when we don't know the durability of these things. But even at $1,000, now actually thinking about it, I think that actually may be a little bit too expensive, just because again we don't know the durability of these things, and it looks like these things just don't last as long as something like your traditional smartphone. But overall, I am very glad to see these companies still sticking to their guts and still trying this foldable smartphone world, this dual screen smartphone world. I love to see things that are fresh and brand new, only because we've had the same smartphone design for many years. Yes, the traditional smartphone is a great design. There's nothing wrong with it. It's functional, it's nice, but over time, sometimes, especially me talking about tech all the time, me looking at the tech industry, unlike a lot of people, I want to see where companies can do these really different concepts when it comes to technology, and it gets me very excited when there's a new, fresh, hot take on something that we've already had for many years. And maybe these things are actually, in the long run, more practical than what we actually thought. We just couldn't get them before, and a lot of people haven't had a chance to try these things, and maybe these things will actually catch on, and maybe this will be the new norm for smartphone technology. Maybe 3, 4, 5 years in the future, everyone's going to be walking around with a Galaxy Fold or a foldable phone in their pocket because they realize that there is practicality and use cases for these things, and they're kind of like hybrid devices, especially when you look at the Galaxy Z Fold. The Galaxy Z Fold is a very interesting device because it blurs the lines of a smartphone and a traditional tablet. Before, people were like, yeah, big screen smartphones can kind of blur the line between smartphones and tablets because they are making their screens bigger, but this one really does blur the gap even more, just because when you open it up, it really does feel like a small tablet in your hands when you use something like the Galaxy Z Fold 2 device. So yeah, very interesting, and it looks very cool. It looks more of the same, to be honest, when you compare this to the original Galaxy's Z Fold or Galaxy Fold that came out last year, I do believe. So just a very interesting device, and I am quite interested when people get this smartphone in their hands. Now, the next one is going to be about 8BitDo, because 8BitDo just released a brand new fighting stick for the Nintendo Switch. Keep in mind, this thing's not going to be for everybody because it is very expensive, but usually fight sticks are expensive to begin with. It looks like this fight stick is going to cost you $90, and $90 is very expensive in the first place, but just the fact that they are releasing this is actually kind of cool, because I know there are fighting fans out there, and there are fighting games on the Nintendo Switch. Of course, Nintendo the Nintendo platform is not the platform for competitive fighting games. And usually when people buy fight sticks, they either want to simulate the experience they would get in the arcade, or they want to play games at the highest level. And unfortunately, to be honest, Nintendo Switch is not the place for that, because Nintendo is missing a lot of games that you would get on other platforms that are very popular fighting games. On top of that, fighting games don't perform that well on Switch. They usually have some type of limitation, and the online for the Switch is not good. So it's kind of like, why take fighting games seriously on the Nintendo Switch outside of games like obviously Super Smash Brothers on the Switch, since that is exclusive. But anyway, it's nice to see that at least they do care about the fighting game scene and fighting game players with this brand new fight stick. Expensive, worth it? Can't really say if it's worth it, because it is a new product. The cool thing about this fighting stick, it looks like this fighting stick is actually based off of the NES. It's really giving me NES vibes here with the whole gray color scheme with this fighting stick, and it looks like it is going to be a premium fighting stick. I do know 8-Bit Do does make some incredible accessories for the Nintendo Switch. If you want a third-party controller, you definitely won't be disappointed with 8-Bit Do. And I'm assuming, just like other products in their lineup, the brand new fight stick is going to be a product that you would actually want to buy, because again, they do make quality products, at least in my opinion, and at least from what I've experienced. Now, the next one is going to be about Samsung, because it looks like Samsung is back at it again, and they are making a mid-ranged phone. Now, if you were here for yesterday's episode, you would know I talked about a brand new phone from OnePlus, and OnePlus was making a brand new phone. It was a very cheap, inexpensive phone. It was only $200, and the crazy thing about that phone for $200 on top of everything was the fact that that OnePlus phone that's coming out for $200 is going to have a 6,000 milliamp battery, and that's pretty insane, because not even flagship smartphones of the world have 6,000 milliamp batteries. So that's pretty impressive. Now it looks like Samsung is actually going to be topping that. This brand new smartphone from Samsung is going to be called the Galaxy M51, and the M51 is going to have a 7,000 milliamp battery. It really does seem like with a lot of these mid-tier phones, especially that new OnePlus phone or this brand new M51 phone from Samsung, you're really buying it for the battery life on top of everything else. A lot of the other things are great, kind of, but you're really buying it for that battery life, because 7,000, 6,000, 5,000 milliamp batteries, you know you're going to have batteries for days. And especially when these phones are mid-ranged phones, the battery's even going to last longer than usual, just because you don't have to worry about the crazy high-end chips that drain a lot of battery. In a lot of cases, you don't have to worry about a crazy screen, because they sacrifice performance and screen quality in these mid-ranged to cheaper budget option alternatives. And these batteries are just going to last a long time, of course. Even though you do have a pretty big, crazy battery in this thing, keep in mind all the other aspects of this smartphone aren't going to be as great, of course. That's what you're sacrificing here. But if you're somebody that just cares strictly about battery, that's where these things really do excel. And the nice thing about Samsung, when they make these mid-ranged phones, they always make them to where they pretty much mimic their premium smartphone counterparts. They pretty much make them the same design, so you're going to get that pretty much all screen, no bezels anywhere, no big forehead and chin. You will get a camera on the screen, but that's to be expected. They're going to do that, but you do get a modern design here. Of course, overall, this looks, again, like a okay smartphone. This one is going to be a little bit more expensive than the OnePlus that I talked about yesterday for $200. This one's going to be $429, but still not a bad deal. We're talking about Samsung here. We're also talking about a crazy 7,000 milliamp battery. We're talking about pretty much a bezel-less display here, of course, a modern design. Overall, this really does seem like a pretty killer smartphone for what you're getting if you need a mid-range smartphone. The only downside with a lot of these mid-range smartphones, they don't seem to come out everywhere in the world. They're exclusive to certain parts of the world. Luckily, if you want to go the distance and you want to actually buy these things, you can actually pre-order these things, and you can still order them online. You will have to pay in a lot of cases like import taxes or extra fees and things like that if you want to order them from another country. But the nice thing is most of the time they're unlocked and you can actually use them on your carrier of choice, even in different parts of the world that may not get these. But it is unfortunate that it always seems like the premium smartphones always get released worldwide, but then the mid-tier to like cheaper alternatives never get released worldwide. They only come to certain markets, which is kind of a shame because these things aren't necessarily bad, and in a lot of cases they may be even more practical than something like a premium high-end smartphone from different manufacturers. And yes, that's gonna do it for today's episode. Anyway, guys, this is Wayne.